Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Kathy Hall. I'm the Executive Director of the Statewide Independent Living Council. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you back for the fourth day. This has been really exciting. We've had some good presenters over the week. I'm going to miss doing this. I'd like to acknowledge the groups that were involved in these activities, and that is Human Dignity, Independence Rising, Easter Seals, Nebraska, Madonna School and Community-Based Services, APSI, Nebraska VR, Adapt Nebraska, Integrative Transitions, Nebraska Family Support Network, Nebraska Statewide Independent Living Council, Disability Rights Nebraska, the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at Monroe Meyer Institute, the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities, People First Nebraska, the Arc of Nebraska, Harper Self-Directed Services, and the Brain Injury Alliance. And I just have a few housekeeping chores go over here. In our Dropbox, and Melanie will put a link to that into the chat session, there is a list of keystrokes for Zoom. They can be used by people who are visually impaired to help navigate Zoom easier. We've spotlighted the interpreters, so it will be easier for people who are using the interpreters to see them. We're asking people to shut off the video and microphone. All sessions will be closed captioned. To turn that on, click on the little CC button on your toolbar, and right beside the CC there is a little arrow. You hit the arrow, a drop down menu comes up, and you pick Enable Sub, and that will start the closed captioning for you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please list them in the chat. And there will be a number of people monitoring the chat feature to make sure we don't miss any questions. All these sessions will be recorded. If you don't want to be identified, you can rename yourself. This can be done by hovering over your little square until 3 dots show in the corner. Then you click on them and a drop down menu will appear, and you select rename, and you just type in anonymous, whatever you want. You can give yourself a John Smith, I don't care, whatever you want. Today, the moderator for this session will be Ian Froeming, and I will turn it over to Ian now.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ian Froeming. I'm the Director of Navigation Services for Madonna School and Community-Based Services. And I'm also the president of the Nebraska APSE Association, which is the Association of People Supporting Employment First. I'm really excited about this afternoon. We have two great presenters that have so much history and so much knowledge of employment supports in Nebraska. I think everybody's really going to enjoy it. First, I kind of wanted to start out today and just go over a few things regarding Employment First. So Employment First gets thrown around a lot, and I think that there are definitely some misconceptions about what that term means. So I'm going to go ahead and share a little PowerPoint on it. And the first thing that we want to talk about is the Employment First philosophy. The Employment First philosophy is competitive integrative employment should be the first option when transitioning out of school-based services. The key to this philosophy is the word option or choice. We are in no way saying that this should be the only option and the only choice for individuals. It should just be the first one. We should always lean towards employment. Employment leads to better integration into the community. It is a definite positive health measure. There are really, really good things that come out of employment, and we want that employment to be competitive and integrated as much as possible. Unfortunately, in Nebraska, we tend to fall behind when it comes to Employment First. So here's a map of the United States, and you'll see down at the bottom right, there's a key for what's going on regarding Employment First around the country. If you'll notice, Nebraska's color is not like any other state's color. It is dark gray and a black hole right in the middle of the map. That means there's no activity regarding Employment First going on in Nebraska. Now, this is not to give a slight or a dig to any providers, because there are plenty of providers in Nebraska that do amazing work when it comes to employment and pre-vocational skills. All this map is saying is that we don't have any legislation driving those providers. So those providers are acting on their own volition and going on what they believe morally and ethically is the right thing to do. I talked earlier about myths and misconceptions when it comes to Employment First. And here are some of the really common ones that I've heard in my work with National APSE and kind of across Nebraska. And the first one is the biggest one. If Employment First legislation passed, I won't be able to stay working in my workshop setting. That's not necessarily true. All it's saying is that we want it to be an option, and we want it to be your choice. If you want to choose to be in a sheltered workshop setting, that's fine. We don't want to upend your life and force you into a change that could affect your life negatively. The second is, if employment numbers for people with disabilities are higher in our state, why would we need legislation? This is really true in Nebraska. Nebraska touts really good employment numbers across the state. We consistently have one of the lowest unemployment rates. However, that does not always carry over to people with disabilities. We are right kind of in the middle of the pack when it comes to unemployment for our people in the state with disabilities. And the answer there is legislation will protect our future. It'll ensure that there's always a strong emphasis on integrated employment for people with disabilities. It's something that we were really strong in the late 70s and early 80s. We were considered a leading state when it comes to employment, and then our state just kind of plateaued. And we want to continue that push and push it past that plateau. And the third one is so important. If I increase my income to minimum wage, I will lose my benefits. That is not necessarily true, and actually very rare in a lot of standpoints. There are professionals in this state who are trained to evaluate your benefits. Most of those services come free of cost to the consumer. So there should be no fear when it comes to losing your benefits and working at a living wage. So I'm going to stop there and get to our 2 star presenters for the day. First is Laurel Johnson from North Star Services in Bloomfield, Nebraska, and I'll turn the mic over to her and let her introduce herself and get her PowerPoint rolling.
Okay, well, like you said, I'm Laurel Johnson. I have worked with North Star Services since 1980, so that makes me an old timer. And, you know, throughout these years, I've had various positions within the agency, different locations. But since we're talking about employment, I have participated in different employment advocacy activities throughout the years, including being a member of APSE that Ian talked about for many years. You know, I've seen a lot of changes within the state of Nebraska, and part of what I'm going to be talking about today are the kind of the changes that we've made within North Star Services too. So next slide, please, Ian. And so just to give a little bit of background about North Star, we have 9 area programs with offices throughout Northeast Nebraska. We are certified by the state of Nebraska, as it says on the PowerPoint there. And the little star there is, that's approximately where Bloomfield is located. The supports that North Star provides include both residential and day services, where employment is generally considered to be part of one of the day services code, but we all know that our job affects all aspects of our life. So since I'm here to talk about employment, and again, we all know, you know, what's that question that you always hear when you first meet somebody? It's, what do you do? And when people were in the workshops, what basically people would say is, I'm with North Star. Again, that doesn't really even say what it is that you do. North Star did, you know, we have recognized the importance of employment services. The changes we started both from within, because different people throughout our agency would get different information. And so we'd start making we'd have some conversations about that. But then we decided we needed to get some help from others. So we started participating in some of the training that was offered, sometimes throughout the state. Sometimes people were involved in going out of state to be getting the training. The information that we got through that training was the best practices from leaders in the field of employment. So then we started thinking, we really don't know that sheltered workshop is working for everybody that we support. At that time, you know, in the sheltered workshops, people were paid monthly, at least through our agency. I'm assuming has happened in a lot of places. And it was mostly piecework rate, but there was some other work that was being done too, but it was packaging for businesses in our area. I kind of had a light bulb moment one time when I got an email from our central office saying that if this specific person's check for the month was less than $1, it wouldn't be paid until the following month. And I'm thinking, what are we doing to people, keeping them in this building from 8:30 to 4:30 every day, Monday through Friday, and the person isn't even getting paid $1 for the whole month. And then as the overall agency, it came time for North Star to complete the sub-minimum wage paperwork. And we made the decision as the whole region to end the sub-minimum wage certificate. So setting up employment services within the agency, it's not done overnight, isn't done by one person. We continue to change as we get updated information. We realized we needed help, and we applied for, and then we did receive various grants. Some of the grants that North Star, that put us on a different track, is, I think, if you want to go to the next one, Ian, was the first one was in 2004 that in Bloomfield we applied for and received the RESEED grant. And the RESEED is, and I have to read this because I can never remember, Rural Entrepreneurship and Self-Employment Expansion Design. And I'll never forget the day when I walked in and I see the big box sitting on my desk, and it's like, oh my gosh, now we got to do something. You know, that's another thing that when you get this kind of training and these kind of resources in a grant, you have to show your progress. So sometimes doing it forces us to do things a little bit differently. We had all of our employees and all the people supported by North Star involved in the activities that we did. And it was officially, like I said, it was in Bloomfield. Throughout the year, there were activities and others from the entire agency participated in these. But just briefly, I guess, the main points that we learned through this process was, you always start with the interest of the person. There's the brainstorming where the interest can be used. And you need to assess the community for what do they need. And then do you need startup costs? And then you find ways of obtaining that. The second grant that we had is the organizational change. And we learned this process. Originally, we learned about it by somebody contacted us and asked us if we had anybody who was interested in attending the National Organizational Forum in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this was through the University of Tennessee that we first got started with it. The actual grant for the process provided the mentoring through the University of Missouri, the CRPRCEP. And it was kind of around those, after the RESEED grant was done, that was 2005, and we probably finished it up in 2008. The first year, but it was actually 2 different years that we had. The first year, the focus was just one of the area programs. But again, like we did with the RESEED grant, there were all area programs tried bits and pieces of what we learned in that whole process. The second year focused on a different area program, but the focus was also on the whole agency. So we looked at systemically, what did we need to change, you know, and then what parts do we keep for our whole agency? It's during this time that as an agency, we made the decision to be an employment first agency, as Ian was also discussing. And what we did, or what we do now, is we offer as the first choice employment. And again, not everybody chooses that, but we'll talk a little bit about that after a bit too. So as we worked through these grant years, one thing became evident: we needed in-house training for our employees. The training activities that we participated in developed, we stress the employment is everyone's responsibility. Everyone has something to offer. We received funding through the DD Council to develop the training. Again, it was a 2-year process. It was to find out what we needed to do, and then how did we put that into our policies and procedures. And but going back to where's that everyone, I'll be honest with you, we had a few employees that didn't think it was that employment was really part of their job, maybe lived in or worked in the residence. I can remember having discussions with people about, it was overnight, people who worked overnight in the residence, that they really didn't have the responsibilities for it. But when you think about it, there's always laundry that needs to be done. There's talking with the person in the middle of the night who maybe they're nervous about starting a new job or a new task in their job, and the next day. It's the brainstorming that happens in our staff meetings about, okay, here's maybe something that's standing in the way, what can we do? And it's, you know, for using everybody's connections and their networks within the agency. We do recognize that many people don't think they can work, or that they won't be successful in a job. Sometimes people need to have more opportunities to try things out. We have tried to encourage a variety of different experiences with people. We supported one person who, when he left his last job, he had a really bad experience and he said he was never going to work again. Anytime somebody would bring it up, he would say, no, I don't want to work. And then one day, one of our North Star employees just asked him, saying that, you know, this place, they need some help. Can you help them out? Well, sure. And you're going to get paid for doing that. It's like, well, and he started working again. And then after that, the job didn't become such a bad idea. He just needed the confidence in himself to know that he could do this. We also support people who really want to work, but maybe the people who love and support them don't think they are ready. And in my experience, I just got to tell you, I was never ready for any of the jobs I've held. Sometimes you just got to try it out and find out what works and what doesn't work. So our core belief is that everyone who wants to work can work. Doesn't matter if a person uses a wheelchair, has non-traditional communication. We just need to find ways to support the person. But we'll come back to some of those ideas too. So with the change in our focus, we came to know what our job is and what it was. The first core thing is that whole idea of matching. You need to match what the interest is to what is needed. So following the concepts of person-centered planning approaches that, you know, right now that the state of Nebraska is focusing on and doing training on the state level, we need to find out what the person's interests and skills are. Everyone enjoys having money to do things that he or she wants to do. But as we all know, there's more to a job than the money. People are more successful if the job that they have is something that he or she likes to do. And employers are much happier when skills are matched to what they need. We need to help the person keep the employment that he or she has. Variety of things we do to support the person and the employer in learning a job, developing adaptations, meeting and working with coworkers, you know, those kinds of things. And there's a lot of behind the scenes things that our employees also do. So North Star's training that was developed through the grant covered supported and customized employment along with self-employment. Now I know on Tuesday, I think it was, that there was information that was given regarding Voc Rehab's supports for self-employment. And I just want to give you just the one example of someone we supported in self-employment. Next slide, please. This goes back to the reseed grant that I talked about. So I guess kind of just, we currently support a couple of people who still have their same businesses that they started back in 2005 is what I'm saying. So 15, 16 years that they developed that and wrote out their business plan, that kind of thing. But as we were working with the self-employment, we kept telling ourselves, you know, we got to learn the process. We're all good about learning those processes. And we're going to work with those people who are easy to do employment with. And then once we learn that, then we'll start working with everybody else. But going back to what one of our core values is, that everyone who wants to work can work. So one day we asked ourselves, why are we waiting? Let's just jump in. And we gathered a team around someone that everybody said can't be employed. After using the person-centered planning, we had three main things that were evident with this person. First one is he loved loud noises. Second thing is he used the Big Mac switch. And the third thing is he loved people, especially those he didn't already know. I think there's a picture of, for those of you who maybe don't know what a Big Mac switch is, this is a picture of his setup when he would be grinding the coffee, because after a lot of work and trying out different things, it was settled on grinding coffee. So this is a picture of his coffee grinder and his Big Mac switch. He would hold the switch down and he would grind the coffee. So that's where we have two of our things right now, because for anybody who has ground any coffee, those things make a lot of noise, and he loved that noise. And then he would push that switch down and then he would laugh and it would grind the coffee. So using the Big Mac switch and the coffee grinder, he filled orders for bulk coffee. He made gift baskets. He had individual servings which were like tea bags, and including like they would package them into those sleeves for gifts. His products were sold at local businesses, by word of mouth, over social media, at farmers markets and craft fairs. And this was through the craft fairs were throughout the year, in the summer and during holidays. Or then he would also grind whenever an order came in. He and his team also organized holiday open houses, which he advertised locally. So remember I told you that number 3, that there were those 3 things that we knew about him. So it was the loud noises, the Big Mac, and then his love of people. But I'm going to add a 4th one. He loved to laugh. So when I mentioned that before, when he would hit the Big Mac switch and the loud noise, he would laugh. When he would see people that especially people he didn't know, he would start laughing. Well, we all know what happens when one person laughs. We all have to laugh right along with him. And he had such an infectious laugh. So when he saw these other people, he would laugh, he would show his enjoyment. And whether he was delivering or using the grinder, and then everyone around him smiled and laughed also. I am sorry to say that this gentleman passed away, but at his funeral, the pastor stated that he was recognized in his community as a businessman. This is so totally different than how he was perceived just before he started his business. People in the community didn't even know his name. So all activities that we do, just to kind of change a little bit here, we require teamwork. It can't just be one person. It's not the responsibility of an employment specialist, of a job developer or a job coach, or whatever the title is that you use. But when brainstorming happens, one idea leads to another and people feed off of each other. The person's excitement grows as he or she sees and feels the supports of family and friends. The focus is that one person, not what he or she can't do, but what are the gifts? What are the interests that this person has? Our current process for North Star, we still keep all of that there, but now what happens when a person is first comes to our agency, or when they have decided that they're going to work, is they're signed up with vocational rehabilitation. So through Voc Rehab, there are things like benefits planning. There's the milestone payments for the DD provider to provide supports to find, start, and maintain the job. Then after a person has been on the job for a while, the DD funding for the long-term supports kicks in. Might be on the job or might be a follow along with the person and employer. And then in some cases, pre-vocational supports can be authorized by DD when someone is interested in working, but may not be receiving VR funding. So I really had hoped today to have somebody, a woman who we support, come talk with you about going through that process. Because when she first came to our area, she initiated the call to Voc Rehab. You know, we're kind of used to doing things ourselves, and it was like, oh, this is cool. She's a pretty determined lady. And I don't know if she was familiar with it from a community she lived prior to, but anyway, so she called. So we had it set up almost from day one with Voc Rehab with her. She worked with North Star to find a job, but she also applied in various places for herself. She worked at a job that she found through this process for a couple of years, and then she received supports from North Star during that time. And then she applied for and got another job, and is currently she's not receiving employment supports from North Star. So she was going to tell you about some of the things that are good about working since she's unable to be with us. I asked other people, and these are some of the things that other people came up with, that some of the positives of working. First of all, increasing social roles, and it might not be exact language that everybody uses, but, they might have said, a coworker, I'm a friend. And then somebody brought up, I'm a taxpayer. And it's like, that is just so true. You are a taxpayer. There are connections that are made in the community that would maybe not be made if the person wasn't working. There are interactions with people who aren't paid to be with you. They meet different people. Somebody one time said to me, I have pride in my job. And of course, it always comes back to money, the ability to be able to afford items. We do support people as they buy their homes and their vehicles. We have a few people around Bloomfield who have done that. When you're working, you're doing what everybody else is doing. And it's meaningful work. You get paid for it, just like everybody else does. People in the community recognize you as an employee, not just as somebody who belongs, and I'm saying that in quotation, belongs to North Star. We also want to talk just a little bit about some of the roadblocks that stand in the way. And the number one thing I think for us is the difficulties sometimes that we have these days of pulling groups together, scheduling a time for teams. It just seems like it's getting more and more difficult. And believe me, it's hard for one person to brainstorm by themselves. Some of the processes that we have to run through, they can be confusing at times. At this point in time, we do not receive supported employment funding for self-employment that we did receive in the past. It's covered under group funding, which then also sometimes makes those individual services difficult because it's hard to do employment with 2 or 3 other people. Another roadblock that we got to figure out how to either work around, plow through, break down, go under, over, all of those kinds of things. Low expectations. And I talked a little bit about that, that somebody might have for themselves or that other people might have. And maybe it's a community thinking that maybe janitorial, I guess will come into that, is the only thing a person can do, or the family, or even as a provider. We have expectations of people and we just have to take a step back and look at that sometimes. Another roadblock are the health concerns that people have. And people have had health concerns even without the pandemic, but and now we're getting into the winter months. So some people it's difficult to go out in the winter time for different health reasons. Transportation is always an issue. We could probably spend the whole day on just talking about transportation. But then, like I said, too, the limitations in thinking that janitorial is all that there is. So having said that, over the years, I have seen people working in a variety of different jobs. So everyone likes doing different things. We found that just by putting a person into a slot, that's not successful. Somebody calls and says, well, I have this job open. And it's like, we've had to say, we do not have anybody that's interested in doing that at this time, but we'll keep it. We'll keep you on file here. So these are just some of the things that people throughout the years have worked different job types, I guess. And I guess that's kind of how we want to leave you with, I guess, just looking at the kinds of things that are out there. And we know that they're out there, and some people everybody has different abilities, different interests. And that's the main thing that I wanted to get, the point that I wanted to get across, I guess, today. So I think that's probably about it. So thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, I guess we'll talk about them now. So, okay.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the chat feature. And we'll take a break after each PowerPoint to kind of discuss the questions. I'll start us off with a question that I have for you, Laurel, and that's Bloomfield's in a rural community, and can you kind of talk about some of the difficulties or the positives and negatives of helping people gain employment in rural communities in Nebraska?
Well, I know before I came up here, I was working with North Star in Columbus, which is a little bit bigger town than Bloomfield. And so when I got up here, of course, we all said, well, our community isn't, in Columbus, they're not accepting, and now things like that probably have changed since I was there. And then I get up here and people would say, I bet it was easier in Columbus to find jobs than it is up here. And I think there's advantages, disadvantages to both. Some of the disadvantages up here is, we're lacking public transportation. There are not as many of the traditional jobs available, when you have fewer businesses and probably smaller businesses, that maybe the availability of some of those jobs. But that's part of the reason why we applied for the reseed grant too, to try to find different ways of doing things. Advantages are definitely community acceptance. Here in Bloomfield, I think people are more easily accepted. The relationships that people have, you know your neighbor when you live in a smaller, because we don't provide supports for anybody who lives in a place that's more than 3 people. And so, it's easier to get to know your neighbors in a situation like that. So yeah, it's relationships with people support, but it's also the relationships that our employees have with other people. Sometimes when you grow up and you live in the same place, you have connections in a different way, and you can talk to people in a little different way. And the other thing is, I think around here, people are used to creating opportunities. I always say, I'm not the creative one. I might have an idea, but somebody else might figure out how to do it. And it's like, which is so cool when people are working together as a team to do that. Does that answer what you're?
Yes, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions, but I guess the last question that I had was, did you see a change in the attitude of your staff and your clients when you switched from the sheltered workshop model to competitive employment? And could you kind of talk about what the attitude of the staff and clients was moving towards that model?
Well, we still from time to time talk about how people will say to me, I had no idea what you were talking about and I thought you were crazy, but I would not go back. I think sometimes when we only know one way of doing things, it's hard to step outside and try, and it's like you just take small steps and you work on things slowly. I think one of the things that we really talked about before we did this is that the connections we didn't want to lose the connections that people had with each other too. So again, talking about how do we keep those connections in place. So once a week, and this was pre-COVID, of course, although they're doing some of it now, but 1 week there was a job club. Anybody who was interested in employment, they would get together and talk about either their job search or what, just anything that had to do with employment. And if they didn't have anything specific, sometimes they would talk about, what do you wear when you go to the job? They'd have different subjects that they would discuss. And then on the opposite week, we had what we called Circle of Friends, where everybody sat in a circle and talked about what was going on in their lives and who they have visited and, those type of things. I think people are happier than what they were before. There's a lot more freedom, that seem to be more satisfied with life, that, you can set your own schedule. Some people talk about they have more money now than what they had before. And, one person one time said to me about the workshop, the work that they were doing in there, it was okay, but I was tired a lot. And this is somebody that sometimes when you would go to talk to him, he'd be sleeping with his head down on the table, or, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, you don't see that kind of thing anymore. They've said that they get to see more people. And then one time somebody said, well, I get to spend time in the store. So, I mean, it's that whole using the community and using the businesses, because otherwise, by the time they would end with the workshop, most of our stores would be closed. You know, by the time people would get home and get their clothes changed and then be able to go. So, you know, there's just a little bit more flexibility in life, I guess.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got 2 questions here from Sandra Peterson. The first is, do you have a checklist or process for approaching employers?
There is a whole, I don't know that it's necessarily a checklist, but we do have processes in place. Like when the position that we have for a person is called employment specialist, and when she talks with a business, you know, she does what we call the business biography, and then does updates to it if there's a change in the business. That's, yeah.
And then the second question is, you talked about team decision making. Would it help if the young person had a person-centered planning while in high school? And then Holly Schweitz added, or younger than high school, to that question.
I think as soon as people start thinking about future, you know, you get so much more information. And then, you know, because for us, we have some people who maybe they don't have family involvement. And so it was, when we started doing the person-centered planning, it was information that staff who had maybe worked with the person for years, and hopefully information that the person also was able to get. But, you know, when you work with people who maybe have non-traditional communication, sometimes it's hard for them to get that information out. So it comes from the staff who know them best. But there's such a difference when there's family involvement, or like in this case, like, or school involvement. People look at things differently. It's like, well, why can't we do that? Oh, you know, we just hadn't thought about that. So, and the more information you have growing up and the experiences that are there that can be used in later in life is just so helpful. That's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Laurel, and thank you for sharing your journey and North Star's journey to kind of upend your guys' services and change the approach you guys had to employment services.
And I just have to say, we are not done changing. We got huge places to go. So just don't think we're perfect, because we are not. So,
if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right?
yeah, but right now I'm the only one in the room, so I'm doing pretty good. So, yeah.
Okay, next up is Becky Kaler, and Becky is the Vice President of Mission Services for the Goodwill of Greater Nebraska. Did I get that right, Becky?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. And she's going to be sharing her PowerPoint on the dignity of work, which is about a study that Dr. Lisa Mills put together. So the floor is yours, Becky.
Sure, I'm Becky Kaler. I do lead the services division at Goodwill Industries of Greater Nebraska. Our corporate location is in Grand Island, and we provide services at a number of locations, essentially from Columbus, Nebraska, out to the Wyoming border. In our Goodwill, in our services division, we have 3 primary service departments. We have our behavioral health services, we have our developmental disability services, and we have our employment and career services department. And in employment and career services, we provide employment supports for folks, Nebraskans, our citizens with lots of different sorts of impact of disability. We provide employment supports for folks with mental illness, substance use disorder, autism spectrum disorder, brain injury, transition age services, services for folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities, services for folks who are involved in the criminal justice system, and we also provide comprehensive benefits planning services. So we have a big interest in how the systems within our state support employment outcomes for our citizens. So I'm sorry, my presentation says October 27th, and that's not today. I guess I finished it a couple of days ago, so forgive me. And if you go to the first slide. So I'm going to talk about a system of employment supports. Laurel's talked so much to us about the important impact for the people that we support and that come to us for assistance. My focus is on the systems that support providers and funders and others in making sure that that desired outcome is achieved. So I'm going to talk to you for a while this afternoon on changes made by states to further employment options and outcomes for our citizens with IDD. I'm really excited to present information to you from Dr. Lisa Mills. I met Dr. Mills about 2 years ago. She was actually referred to me by another subject matter expert who works in the area of behavioral health and substance use disorder. And I said, you know, I really am trying to understand what's going on in other states around employment supports for our citizens with IDD. And that individual said, oh, you've got to talk to Dr. Mills in Wisconsin. So I reached out to her, and she's been just a blessing to me since that point in time. Dr. Mills has a wide variety of subject matter expertise. She is well versed in the whole movement of employment first. She has subject matter expertise in value and outcome-based purchasing in state systems, which we'll talk about a lot today. A lot of expertise in evidence-based models for advancing employment. Some of you may be aware of, customized employment approaches or IPS approaches, which has a huge research base. And she's also quite an expert in understanding Medicaid home and community-based services, or HCBS. So we were blessed to have Dr. Mills come to Nebraska first in July of 2019. She presented a presentation on employment innovation to the Nebraska Association of Service Providers and a number of other Nebraska stakeholders. Some of the information that I'll share with you today came from that presentation. And I want to again thank Nebraska's Council on Developmental Disabilities and Kristen Larson for supporting that first visit that Dr. Mills made to our state. Ian, if you would go on. Today, I'm really going to be spending the majority of the time talking to you about a brand new publication that Dr. Mills has completed titled Value-Based Payment Methodologies to Advance Employment First. And it's a mix of inspiring examples from across our country. This work was completed in 2020. It was funded by the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP is the acronym that you'll often hear. And this is work that Dr. Mills created to assist state agencies and other funders that serve people with disabilities and that purchase services that support employment participation. So this whole 96-page summary of her research over the last 15 to 20 years is really sharing what other states are doing to make employment a reality for more and more people in their state. So this document, Value-Based Payment Methodologies to Advance Employment First, is based on a key fundamental principle, and that is to ensure that everyone with a disability is given the chance. Ian said earlier, we're not forcing anybody into a choice of employment. It's making sure that people have a chance to succeed in employment. Initially, to have the supports the opportunities, and most importantly, the encouragement to try. So often, I've been working in our system ever since I was a sophomore in college, and that's a long lifetime. And the one thing that I'm the most excited about now is that states are recognizing and understanding that people need the encouragement, they need education, they need information, not just the question, do you want to work? So we'll base our work today and our discussion today on that fundamental principle. So we need to commit to change, right? It takes all of us. If we don't believe that people with disabilities can succeed in employment, who will? Those of us who work in the system, I'm going to be talking about systems, must have that commitment. It has to be us in partnership with the people we serve that forge the path to success. This is so important. Income generation is a valued outcome for all people, regardless of the impact of disability or anything else on their life. System transformation that truly delivers a better quality of life and increased economic self-sufficiency is needed. So our responsibility is to help more people achieve success in employment. We all hear a lot about the social determinants of health. There's been so much research to support that employment really is a part of living a healthy life. The benefits of work are well documented. People typically have better health, better mental health, more independence, more inclusion, more financial security, and more mobility. Many, many things that are important for this investment. We also know that there are some really important laws that have taken us in a different direction. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requires, for the first time, cooperative agreements between vocational rehabilitation agencies and developmental disability agencies within all of our states. They need to work together to collaborate to increase employment outcomes. Also, our Medicaid home and community-based settings rule requires that people who are funded under these waivers must have the opportunity to seek employment and work in integrated settings. So with all of these changes and all of this research, state agencies really have begun to look closely at their funding structures to see how they may be impacting their efforts to increase employment opportunities for citizens. Ian talked about the Employment First movement. And in 2012, the Office of Disability Employment Policy within Department of Labor launched the first state leadership mentoring program. And this was intended to support states to advance competitive integrated employment for their citizens with disabilities. And under this approach, there were three primary areas of effort. Publicly financed systems needed to align their policies, their practices, and their reimbursement structures. Again, paying for the things that help people get to employment, in commitment to integrated employment being a priority option for publicly financed service delivery systems, a priority option. And so that's really the whole notion of employment first. Many states involved with the leadership program wanted to address their funding structures. They started to look at not just how much they paid for various employment services, but how they paid. It wasn't just the rate, it was how it was paid, when it was paid, for what it was paid. The focus quickly included paying for outcomes, in addition to a traditional focus on just purchasing a service, and new and innovative ways to align financial incentives for providers who achieved competitive integrated employment outcomes for people were developed. And that's been going on for quite some time. Another core value, think about this one. Full inclusion will come when we no longer need the word inclusion, since there will be no opposite state of exclusion. Competitive integrated employment actively counters exclusion. and changes the perceptions of everyone, paving the way to exclusion becoming a thing of the past. All of the examples that Laurel gave were phenomenal examples of folks just being folks in the community, taking their place next to any other citizen to be included. So to advance employment first, we need to not be shy about the expectation that people with disabilities, all people, have something of value to contribute to the broader society. I always tell our staff, what did God put you on the earth to do? And every one of us has that same sort of core strength and core contribution. It is appropriate to expect people with disabilities to have the opportunity to contribute through employment, just like the overwhelming majority of working age people in our country who don't live with some sort of impact of a label. Therefore, funding models must align with the expectation that citizens with disabilities will contribute through employment. Dollars allocated must be recognized as dollars invested, not just dollars spent. It is an investment in a better world. Funding models must realize the investment we want and need to make, and the things that Dr. Mills has documented in her paper on value-based payment methodologies is that there's information about funding for employment services, policies for employment services, and a lot of information about developing the commitment and the capacity and the competency for employment services providers and employers. I want to stop on that one just a little bit. We talk a lot about funding. We talk a lot about policy, but the commitment, capacity, and competency for employment services from providers and employers. Some of these models that Dr. Mills highlights in her work over the last 15, 20 years really discuss how states have invested in helping providers understand the benefits of shifting their business model in this direction. How states have reimbursed or reinforced providers for building capacity, for training their staff, for making sure that they're using best practice and results-oriented practice, and for increasing the competency of their staff. So it's a very different approach. States and funding agencies have gotten really involved in helping develop the whole system, including the provider community. An important assumption that I'll ask you all to make, and that Dr. Mills asked us to make, is that commitment, capacity, and competency for our citizens who live with disability labels already exists. We don't have to build that. It's there. What we have to do is build a service delivery system that offers access to effective services, effective supports, and that offers encouragement to contribute. And as I look at systems and how they've changed over my career, the one that excites me the most is the one that focuses on education and encouragement, to give it a try, to see how employment can affect your life. So here's a really wild notion for all of us to consider. Less funding used through more effective funding models has the potential to produce better outcomes than more funding distributed through less effective funding models. We never talk about less funding, right? We always say we don't have enough, we don't have enough. Dr. Mills' data really does support it, that using the funding you have in better ways can produce much stronger results. So the question that Dr. Mills asks in her research is, and in her work with so many states, how can we redirect and repurpose our existing funding to advance employment? And it's a critical systems level question. We have other challenges though than funding, right? Supporting people with disabilities in more individualized ways is typically seen as harder than serving people in the traditional way. Our typical infrastructure isn't built to support quality employment services. It's really built to support residential settings and more traditional day services. And the other thing that's really hard is that it's really hard to change. Systems are big and they're strong and they're tough, and it's hard to move into a different direction. Laurel said, "Oh my gosh, her staff thought she was crazy when she wanted to change." And Laurel's system in Bloomfield is probably a little bit smaller than our state system. So she was able to move things along in a little bit different way and to influence that change. To move a state, to move a funding structure is a big, hairy, giant bunch of hard work. I want to talk about one systems challenge that has been well documented and that has, I know, affected us professionally at Goodwill a lot over the years. The most dominant systems challenge interfering with advancing employment is the use of fee-for-service funding models. The ultimate counterproductive funding model is fee-for-service funding with face-to-face only billing permitted. Something that was done with very good intent. This funding structure of fee-for-service funding actually undermines the result of competitive integrated employment for more Nebraskans who live with disability labels. Fee-for-service funding is not well aligned with quality employment service delivery, with evidence-based practice, with customized employment, with flexible employment supports, all of which are a key support of good, strong services. So, a couple of things, reasons why fee-for-services funding in Dr. Mills' research and also in many of our experiences is not helpful. We need to fade on the job supports, right? A fundamental expectation in supported employment is that on-the-job supports will fade over time. If providers are reimbursed for the hours of services delivered, they have no financial incentive to develop jobs where fading is possible. Jobs that are well matched to the person's ability, that's not a priority. In workplaces where natural support potential exists is not a priority. There's no incentive to implement effective strategies to fade once a person is on the job. Think about it. If you're going to be able to pay your staff's wages at the end of the pay period, you have to earn a certain amount of money. And if that certain amount of money requires you to be there in an environment in order to face-to-face, in order to be paid, it pushes providers out of the sake of just wanting to pay their staff, to provide services that may not be needed. So fading of on-the-job supports is not encouraged, is not incentivized in a fee-for-service funding model. Supported employment providers who do poor job matching, who don't implement strategies to fade, experience no reduction in compensation. And again, that's kind of indicating the person has a poor motivation. Sometimes it's just simply making sure you have enough revenue to pay your staff. Another area of concern, reimbursing only for face-to-face service delivery. Critical early stages of job development are typically not done with the job seeker present. Someone asked Laurel about how to approach employers. In best practice, in supported employment best practice, we know that employer engagement, informational interviewing with employers, building that employer network is a critical piece of quality job development and good job matching. If you can only be paid when you're in the job seeker's presence, there is no reimbursement then for potentially for these early stages of job development. When a supported employee is settled on the job, the most effective supports are often the least intrusive. We always tell our employment specialists, you know, the better job you do at discovering the person's talents, the better job you do at building relationships with employers, a wide variety of employers, the better job you do at matching, the better job you do at building the relationship between the employer and the supported employee, the less you should even have to be in that environment. And that doesn't mean that the person doesn't need support. Sure, the person needs support. They just don't need face-to-face only support in the job environment. Reimbursement for face-to-face support encourages unnecessary and potentially intrusive methods, and it discourages the use of more discreet and cost-effective methods. And, you know, we're in a world of technology. Providers who use innovative things like cell phones and tablets and Skype aren't rewarded for adopting these approaches in a face-to-face fee-for-service only arrangement. Another area of concern in a fee-for-service arrangement is that it doesn't encourage us or motivate us to increase job quality. Fee-for-service approaches don't provide incentives to increase the hours that supported employees work, particularly if this can be done without the need for additional on-the-job supports. And we all know that low-hour jobs are a chronic problem in our nation. Incentives are needed to reverse that trend. People can earn, people can work, people can be a part of their communities, and there are systems available to help us make that happen. Increasing the hours that people work isn't rewarded in a fee-for-service approach that pays for hours of service delivered by the provider. And then preventing job loss. Oh my gosh, that's such an important key to quality supported employment. A fee-for-service approach doesn't include strong incentives for providers to prevent job loss. It's often difficult for providers to get timely authorizations to temporarily increase job coaching hours to prevent job loss. And so, you know, you just need to either provide the supports without reimbursement or wait and risk the person losing their job. And I want to really emphasize on that notion of being able to have a system that allows employment support providers to be flexible and to move in and out of the person's life in whatever way is needed for that individual in a very person-centered way. We need to prevent job losses, because the more people stay in a job and learn in a job and become a part of a job family, the more they can increase their hours, the more they can become independent, the more they can become included in that environment, in that work family. And when we don't prevent job losses, think of the negative impact, not only on the supported employee, but the negative impact on the employer. You know, that the employer loses faith in us, you know, that we really are quality providers of supports and services for folks. So preventing job loss is a very, very important feature that we should be striving for in our system. Ultimately, and there are lots of data to support this, a fee-for-service funding approach is likely to result in the most capable organizations which require the least hours to deliver services due to their capabilities to end up with the least billable hours and the lowest reimbursement for their results, for quality employment services results. More capable organizations, more capable supported employment providers receive less funding as the result of being more capable. So Dr. Mills has worked with a lot of states, and in her review, she shares Information from all of these: Iowa, Michigan, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Alabama, North Carolina, Arkansas, Oregon, Delaware, Georgia, Oklahoma. Some of them, a lot of information, some of them just touching on the changes that they made. But these are systems that have been working with different ways of increasing employment supports and the effectiveness of employment supports for many, many years. So there's lots of work there for us to review and understand. Very broadly, these are some of the alternative models that have been developed, some of them, not all of them. A lot of emphasis on essential preliminary service prior to actual job seeking. In some states, that responsibility is taken on by the DD provider. There are examples of employment exploration services that really help build genuine informed choice. In those services, it's not just the job seeker that it's involved, their family members and their guardians are also included in the service and in the information. And again, the purpose of that service is to help the individual and their loved ones develop genuine, educated, informed choice about whether competitive work in the community is right or wrong for them. Milestone payments for successful progress to an employment outcome. We know that most all state VRs, vocational rehabilitation agencies, have adopted the milestone approach, which honestly, when Nebraska first started that in our behavioral health program, I thought the world was going to come to an end. And now that I've worked in that area for a number of years, I love it. It really does encourage us to do a good job of supporting people. And if we do a good job with supporting enough people, the folks that are harder to serve, we're able to sustain those more intensive costs because we've been able to receive funding on the other side. This is really an important one: reimbursement based on hours worked by the supported employee. You don't get paid for the service, you get paid for, is the person working 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week. Higher payments for higher acuity levels. So it's to avoid creaming, so that folks who have higher needs, more significant needs, there is additional reimbursement for that. And examples about braiding and sequencing of services between the waiver entity, the Medicaid entity, and vocational rehabilitation to increase employment outcomes, to ensure fair cost sharing, and to adhere to federal requirements. In some of these states, the waiver agency, the Medicaid agency, picks up the front part, and then VR picks up the middle part, and then the waiver agency finishes up, but there's a lot of flexibility. In some situations, people never wait. If one entity can't handle it, then they'll go into the other one. Just a lot of really creative and innovative approaches in those partnerships. So lessons learned. Dr. Mills, she goes into many, many pages of the details of what other states have done and how they got there and the mistakes they made and the things that worked well. But she did come out with some principles about how to work together on systems change that I want to touch on briefly. Her first principle is to clearly define our intended outcomes and be firm and unwavering in the value of competitive employment for the lives of people with disabilities. She tells us, know where you're going, even if you don't know how to get there. Begin with the end in mind. Be clear about the desired outcome and the value of employment for people with all sorts of circumstances. Principle 2, stop the blame game. Create an atmosphere for successful collaboration. Becky, point the finger at you to see what you can do to be a better partner, a better collaborator. Own your own part of the responsibility for lags in systems change. and be prepared to give and to get. You know, when I was in grad school, one of my professors always taught me the more different kinds of views and people that you can learn to collaborate with, the more effective you'll be. So I think that's something that Dr. Mills is trying to help us think through. Principle 3, commit to making changes, not just talking about them. As leaders, as conveners, we need to be certain that we are ready to make change and we're going to make change. And principle 4, don't make presumptions about the scope of change that will result. Opportunities to innovate and to adopt progressive new methods are equally present, whether we are not an employment first state or whether we are. We need to be optimistic about the change that can happen. Principle 5, turn outward for inspiration, but then be sure to turn back inward to build our own homegrown approaches that all partners can embrace. Local systems are best served by homegrown systems developed in collaboration with local stakeholders. This is really an important way to think about this. Learn about what other states have done, but then pull together a set of trusted stakeholders, people that you trust, people that care, and together seek elements to build our solution. Principle 6, assist providers of relevant services to evaluate and understand their cost of doing business in different ways. Some providers are going to say, this doesn't make any sense. We have to be paid for the hours of service we provide, or that we have to have higher rates. But we need to help providers understand that sometimes doing less is doing more. And that if we're going to change as a system, we have to think about all of the stakeholders involved, including our provider community. Principle 7, use a transparent and logical approach to understanding service delivery cost. Reimbursement structures must support and reward best practices that are proven to lead to employment outcomes. People need to be using the systems that we know work, and provider data needs to be secured. And then we need to adjust it to make sure that it allows for implementation of best practices. In one state that Dr. Mills worked with, the funding agency actually provided an incentive at the end of a period of time for, numbers of hours worked that was above and beyond, the typical reimbursement structure. Principle 8, return to desired outcomes and use backward reasoning to arrive at your method, which best achieves desired outcomes. Dr. Mills talks about this a lot, and those of you who were in her session in July of 2019 remember this. Sometimes we achieve more by doing less as a result of getting the right things done. We need to focus on getting the result, not just volume of service delivery, and we need to work backward from the goal to figure out how to achieve it. Adopt the right amount of sophistication in your model, not too complex, not too simple. She encourages us to think, is our system fair? Is it adjusted based on the level of challenge? Is our system effective? Does it produce the desired results? And is it cost effective? How do we use the funding we have to get the biggest result, the biggest bang for the buck? And on the notion of, is the system effective? These are the questions she asks us to consider. Are people working? Are more people working? Are people who have typically been working more hours? Are fewer people losing their jobs for preventable reasons? Are people who are working able to work more independently as they hold their jobs for longer periods? Are people who are working able to earn increasingly more as they hold their jobs? And these last two really resonate with me. Are more people not yet working making an informed choice? And are more people not working choosing to establish an employment goal? And principle 10, the effort is worth undertaking. It's worth doing it right than knowingly shortchange the process. in all the time I've worked with Dr. Mills, she always says, you need to take the time. You need to take the time. Have the staying power to work through the challenges. And then some of the strategies that she has created include pilot the changes, come up with an idea and try it out, see if it works, see how it works. Allow side-by-side billing for a period of time. Take more time when needed. Sometimes you just need to say, we're not ready. We've got to slow it down. We've got to build a system that's going to work. And devise temporary short-term workarounds. So there's a piece of data that I thought all of us might be interested in. Dr. Mills in her work shared information about some work she had done in Wisconsin, and that those approaches, those systems changes have been in place for some time now, in excess of 6 years. And she said after 25 months of making the changes in their system to increase employment outcomes, they saw a 35% growth in competitive integrated employment. Now, after 6 years of using more outcome-based, more values-based approaches, they've seen a 71% growth in competitive integrated employment. So, those numbers seem noteworthy and something that we might, as a system, want to learn more about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. There's so much to unpack there. I think just the amount of information that was in that presentation was phenomenal, and you did such a great job. We're so thankful and blessed to have you on Nebraska's side and pushing for change in Nebraska's systems. Going to the comments, we've got a couple questions. Mark Shriver asked if it would be possible if you could share the document you referenced that summarized Dr. Mills's research.
Yes, I specifically reached out to Lisa when Kristen asked if I would be involved in this presentation. And I said, well, what new research do you have? And she said, well, I just finished this piece for ODEP. And she said, but ODEP hasn't released it yet. And she said, but I can send it to you. And so I thanked her for that. And as I was wrapping up on the presentation, I did send her an email and I asked, can I distribute this further? And she did give me some opportunity to do that. So I'll probably work with Kristen and see, what we think would be the most appropriate approach. I did not ask Dr. Mills how soon Department of Labor is going to, release it in a public way.
Awesome. Carol McMorris asked to get an example of working backwards from a goal. Have you experienced anything like that in Nebraska in the past? Have we had that approach to systems changes, or can you think of anything?
Oh, I can't think of a time when we've worked backwards from a goal. I mean, it seems like in my experience, we're always looking at what are the rules, what are the methods, but just to say, we want the quality of jobs to increase. What's it going to take to get there? We want we want people having the education they need, the true factual education they need to make an informed choice. No, I can't remember a time when we've done that. I would love to.
Can I throw something in here? When we did our whole organizational change process, we had a regional guidance team, and then each area program had their own guidance team. And what we used was the person-centered planning path, which can be used also for organizations. So it's, what's your dream? What do you really want to work on? And then where are you at now? And then you break down the steps. I mean, I know that's a little more general, but and I'd like to say it's easy to do, but it's not. So, but
You know, and I want to just speak on behalf of the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities. We're right in the middle of developing our state plan goals for the next 5 years. Employment is definitely popping, and just what you shared, we know what the goal is. We want more people competitively employed, and you just gave some strategies of how that can happen. So the timing of this was just perfect, and we will be definitely taking a lot of what you shared. And please thank Dr. Lisa Mills for her insight and her willingness to share that information. So thank you guys.
Okay, awesome. It looks like we are right up against 2:30. If anyone has any other questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us today. That Becky and Laurel, those were phenomenal presentations, and we're really lucky to have strong advocates like you in Nebraska.